It's happening. Hello and welcome back, everybody. This is On the Schmooze Live, which is, oh my God, my voice. Hold on.
It's all good. You're human.
Being human here. Excuse me. The whole getting over the allergy season. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, replay viewers who are really going to see this. Everything else will crop out. But we're excited. We have a great guest. And now I'm going to do the official introduction. Today's guest believes inclusion is more than a moral obligation. It's a competitive advantage. Her presentations on blameless inclusion spark not just inspiration, but action as well. Her firm has extensive experience and a proven reputation for driving better business outcomes through innovative and inclusive strategic planning. They bring deep expertise in improving profitability and innovation, boosting team and organizational performance, and optimizing inclusion strategies. She's the author of The 7 Simple Habits of Inclusive Leaders, and has been featured in publications such as Forbes Magazine, Smart Meetings, and The Meeting Professional. Please join me in welcoming Melissa Majors.
Hey, Robbie, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thrilled that you're joining us from your place in Dallas, Texas. As you know, there's a show about building strong networks, but the context is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
Robbie, so I got to tell you, I'm going to answer that question in terms of a story, okay? Because I'm a storyteller. And it gives me a chance to brag on the best boss I ever had, who was the epitome of servant leadership, which means wanting and doing whatever it takes to help other people thrive. And this boss I'm going to tell you about, her name is Carpenter, and I was fortunate enough to work with her early in my career, so really shaped my philosophies on leadership. And Karen was incredible because she really cared about the success of everybody in the team. I mean, she gave us all the tools, the resources, the connections, and the swift kick in the pants if we needed to be held accountable, right? She'd be the first one to give it to us. And so as you can imagine, everybody in her team thrived. We weren't afraid to take risks and innovate. So this was at Nationwide Insurance back in the early 90s or the late 90s. And as a result of feeling so empowered, I pioneered digital education for Nationwide before online learning was even a thing. Okay. And so, as you can imagine, that landed me in a very high level position. I got lots of promotions and things like that. And the first big step, though, I was fumbling. Oh my goodness, Robbie, it was bad because I lacked confidence. And Karen, knowing my intrinsic motivators and really knowing what made her team members tick, she grabbed me one day and she was like, "Listen, Melissa, you weren't given this job. You earned it. So get out there and show them what you're made of." And that's exactly the motivation that I needed. And I tell you, Robbie, I rocked that job. Okay. And it was as a result of that, landed on stages talking about what we had done. And that just really catapulted my career. But it was as a result of the incredible leadership and influence of Karen Clark Carpenter. And so that's how I define leaders. It's people who use their influence and power, whether you're a people manager or not, to help other people thrive. And it was also in that moment where I realized I had what it took to be an incredible leader. And as I mentioned, that really changed the trajectory of my career.
What an opportunity. What a story. I mean, to have that kind of boss early on in a career to really live what leadership could look like and give you the experiential opportunity to be like, oh, this is what it's like to be well supported and encouraged in my way, like that they were understanding what would be the motivator for you, and that you were given opportunities to shine and supported along the way. Sometimes we get elevated in a role and we don't get the tools we need to do our best work, and it sort of undermines our confidence. But you were given the tools to succeed, and also to be doing digital learning in the late 90s. I mean, that was it was innovative and edgy. And
it was definitely edgy.
Yeah. I was like, no one was talking about this. So it also positions you suddenly, in those moments, you become the expert on this space because you're just doing it. You're figuring it out as you go. And, must be also a really creative place to be at an early point in your career where people's voices and opinions are sort of being brought in, because you don't innovate in a, tight, restricted, everyone just do their own job kind of role. So what a unique opportunity. I'm kind of curious, kind of who you were before all of that, because for you to have had that opportunity, there must be something about who you already were. So I want to wind the clock back a little bit to, I'm always curious, like who people were when they were kids, like on the playground, or, did you run for office in high school, or did a teacher recognize your leadership potential, or were you the quiet kid who was kind of watching it all unfold?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Let's unpeel this onion here. Robbie, I think I was always a leader. Like didn't know it, but I was always a leader. I was always taking on leadership roles. I remember in high school, I directed a play in high school, and it was phenomenal. It was an incredible experience, and everybody was they all felt like their part was equally important, and some had bigger roles, if you can define it that way, bigger roles than others. But I think it was my leadership style that is much more approachable and share power with versus try to power over. I think I always had that. And I'm the youngest of 9 kids. So that is an unfair advantage that I learned how to adapt and navigate and collaborate with a whole lot of folks, just, being at home with all of those kids. And so, yeah, that was me growing up. And it took leaders seeing that. I didn't recognize that, but it took incredible leaders like Karen and others to see that potential in me and say, there's something there. And let's pull her in and give her some stretch assignments. And people believed in me. And that really boosted my confidence after you get some wins under your belt. And so then just continuing to move up the ladder intentionally, because I felt like I had some greatness to offer to the world. I'm really grateful for that start in life.
I'm curious, what's the stereotype about the youngest of 9? I mean, I don't know.
That we're
I don't know if
spoiled.
the stereotypes go that far.
That we're spoiled, yes. But the reality is we are spoiled.
Yeah.
But I
Well
was
taken
never
care
a
of.
brat. I was never bratty about it. Like I've always been a grateful person, and I come from really good stock. My parents are wonderful salt of the earth type people. So never took that for granted. But what's interesting is that um, I learned what not to do. Like my older brothers and sisters, I'm so grateful that they were adventurous and wild and fun and, live really full, great lives. But I learned what not to do so that I didn't get in trouble. And that turned into wisdom that I didn't have to earn on my own. And I'm grateful, both my professional side and my personal side, for that insight.
Sometimes you witness people doing um, those maybe misbehaviors or those adventurous deeds, and you don't learn the lesson not to do it. You learn the lesson how not to get caught doing it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No,
So,
I was too chicken. I just didn't do it.
yeah. But even the fact that you stepped into the role of directing a play in high school says something about who you were back then, right? Like
Mm,
you didn't recognize leadership as a term. We didn't use that term when you were a kid, like who would?
yeah.
But that you put yourself in that role, that you saw the opportunity and said yes, and that you gave everyone equal access to the experience. People felt good about, like, you were caring about how they felt. And I think the word inclusion here kind of fits in, even though, again, you didn't use that term, but
Yeah.
you wanted everyone to feel like they were playing a part, whatever that
Yeah.
role was. And that
Yeah.
that's that feels like a lot of who you are today. So it's cool to see some evidence of that early on in that dynamic. And where did you grow up? What state?
Columbus, Ohio.
So you were in Columbus, Ohio. So you're in a city having this experience. That's really cool. Like I love sort of placing some of this, because it's hard when we see people who are really successful to imagine like how they got there.
Yeah, oh my goodness, it's so interesting. I love where you're leading this conversation, because I never actually stopped to reflect on that phase of my life, on how it really set the tone for a lot of things I'm doing today. I mean, as you know, I'm a keynote speaker. I spend a lot of time on stages sharing wisdom and educating others on how they can be better leaders. I just remembered I was the salutatorian at my graduation, high school graduation. And so that was really the first time I found myself on stage, and it was so well received, and I'm still doing it. So, yeah, so interesting, as you
I
start to
got
unpack
chills.
this,
I got
the
chills just now.
context for your life. It's amazing.
Yeah, you've always been who you are. You've just got a
Yeah.
better at sort of proclaiming it, and being
Mm.
fully. who you are. But again, you had the opportunity, you took it, you did it well, people received it well, you prepared for it, right? Got past the nerves of doing it the first time. I had an experience actually of speaking in front of state legislators when I was maybe 15.
Ooh.
And it was a breakfast, and I sort of didn't know enough to know that I should be nervous about it. Does that make any sense?
Well, you're invincible at 15, like, you know.
Like I just was like, I had a message, and these are the people who are going to make change, and I thought it was important, you know. So I just
Mm,
there was an affect about it, which of course they loved that I was, you know, just doing it.
yeah.
But I was prepared by my parents to like do this thing and not make a big deal about how it was being done. Like the medium wasn't important; it was the message. And I
Mm,
think that similarly, like sets you up for a life to take on new tasks. At
mm.
12-ish years old, what did you think you were going to be growing up? Like, what was the big career dream?
I wanted to be in advertising.
Wow.
I had an uncle who owned an advertising firm, and I thought his life was so spectacular, and the places he went and traveled the world and the things that he did. And the creativity with advertising, and negotiating behavior change and, sales and all that stuff. I just thought that was incredibly fascinating. So that's what I wanted to do. And yeah, it's changed. Certainly it changed a gazillion times since then, but that's what I wanted to do at 12.
So what I'm hearing though is lifestyle was important to you, creativity was important to you, that you also got a glimpse behind the scenes at how advertising was impacting how we thought. And
Yeah.
so you understood that there was like a sway happening, and you
Yeah,
wanted to be part of that. I mean, that's a cool thing to be aware of at 12 years
it
old.
is. I didn't realize it, like, you don't know those labels, as you mentioned earlier, you don't realize the
Yeah.
labels, but that's it. And human behavior, I'm fascinated with
Mhm.
human behavior and how we're wired and how we think the way that we do and what causes us to behave a certain way. I've always been fascinated with that.
I used to sit in the mall. I grew up in Long Island, New York, so we,
Mm.
being on malls, and I would watch the traffic flow change depending on where the benches and the potted plants were.
Oh my goodness, look at you. Look at
Yeah,
you know
it's
what, how does
fascinating.
that apply? How do you does that relate to what you do today?
I think that, people just go with the flow, and if you give them enough structure, they're having a good experience. They don't want to stop and think about where to go next.
Ooh,
They want to have a good experience, and if you're leading them the right way and it feels good to them, like they're not going to cross over to try something else if what's happening right now feels right. So yeah,
yeah.
it's group dynamics, and yeah, it is sort of interesting. So was college part of the plan for you?
College was always part of the plan for me.
And the
My father tell you another story. So my father he's 89 now, and he was born in the rural South. My father's a black man, born in the rural South, and was denied an education after the 3rd grade. And I discovered that he didn't know how to read when I was like 7 years old, and I was learning how to read. I went to him and asked him to read me a book, and he just kind of blew it off and said, "No, I'm busy watching this shoot 'em up," or something like that. And I was just completely devastated as a daddy's girl. I went to my mom in tears and I explained what happened. And she said, "I need to tell you a secret. Daddy
Mhm.
would give anything to read that book to you, but he doesn't know how to read." And she said that men like daddy, oftentimes their muscles were valued more than their brains during that era. And so he didn't learn how. And it was in that moment, Robbie, as we're peeling back the layers of, our younger years, it was in that moment, it was very transformative for me because I was committed then to helping break down any barriers to education. And I have since taught thousands of people from stages online and in person, led teams of people who also are responsible for educating. But my first student was my dad when I taught him how to read. So we learned how to read together. And yeah, you talk about transformative experiences. That was definitely one that set me up for a love of educating others and helping them be their best person.
What a beautiful tribute to,
Mm,
his love for you, your mom's wanting to protect him, but also protect
mm,
you from this, hurt that you were feeling, and then you bringing him along with you on your own learning journey. My kids are now 4.5 and 6.5, so they are right in
mm,
that like early learning stages and
mm.
reading, and it's exciting and it's hard and it's really fun. And if I couldn't fully participate, yeah, it would be pretty devastating if I
Yeah,
couldn't help them in this moment. So I can
absolutely.
imagine how he was feeling.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you. So he was that. caused him to become incredibly dedicated, committed, and make sure his kids could get college education. And so he worked at a university, so all of us could go to college, and have the opportunity to do that. And so, yes, college was always in the works for me, even before I was born, because of that reason.
So you're the youngest of 9,
Yeah.
and it was with you that he finally learned to read. So he evaded this moment 8 times.
Oh, yeah.
So you
Absolutely.
managed to break through
Mhm.
a real barrier. I mean, that's a skill in itself to see a barrier and somehow still reach people who have sort of been living, with this truth that they kind of don't want to reveal.
Mhm. And, he's
And
so savvy at navigating that. My father's one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. I mean, you talk about being able to read human behavior. You have to get really keen at those skills, especially to make up for the fact that he couldn't read. He can read people like that. And so and common sense, which is not that common these days. He has more than his fair share and blessed me with some of that too. And so, yeah, I was the one that learned that and did something about it, and I'm so grateful. And even to this day, I mean, he's given me permission to tell this story. He's and not ashamed of it at all. But without me sharing that story, people would never know. You couldn't know because he's gotten good at faking it, if you will.
mhm.
Mm.
Well, we all do for different parts of our
Yes,
our
we do.
work and life that we're not sure we have all the skills and experience to back us up.
Mhm.
And I love that he's found ways to compensate that are often underappreciated by other people, like being able to read how other humans are or just understand like the situation. I think some people just don't know how to read a moment, even
Yeah.
though they know how to read a paper. When you
Yes.
graduated, you went into a career. What was the initial career path?
The initial career so that's funny. So I sold fine jewelry all through college. I loved that job. I loved sales and mixing and mingling with people, and it was just a fun job. Got to hang out in the mall, like my favorite place. You talk about go to the mall and sit and watch people. My favorite place ever. And then I was emceeing a fashion show at our church, and one of the senior executives at Nationwide Insurance was in the audience. And like I said earlier, she saw something special in me and recruited me to join the firm. And so I did. And so I started off on the investment side of the business, got all my licenses. And then after I pioneered digital education for them, I was on stage talking about it and got recruited to join a firm down here in Dallas, Texas. Got a job offer I couldn't refuse. I'd never even been here before. So I packed up everything and moved away from my big, wonderful family and came down here to Dallas and started a whole nother journey, which I spent about 8 years there and running sales enablement for an investment firm, reporting to the president of the company. And then got married, had a couple kids, and decided I was going to take a little time off to enjoy my family and do just that. But then after about a year, I felt like my brain was leaking out of my ears. I realized being a stay-at-home mom is the hardest job on the planet. Shout out to stay-at-home moms. Love what you're doing. I'm just not wired for it. And I wasn't my best self, both to myself and my kids and my family. So I said, I need to get back to work. And that's exactly what I did. And that I ran global education for a technology company. And then when that changed, or I moved on from there and went to the non-for-profit sector and ran global education for an association. And then finally found the guts and motivation to launch my own practice. And it's going on 5 years and I'm thriving.
Wow, I
Yeah.
love that. Thank you for capturing all of that really succinctly.
Sure.
I wanna point out that it starts with you emceeing a fashion show at your church.
Yeah.
Again, not a role everyone wants. A lot of people would be like, "Nope, no thank you," but you were like, "Yeah," and clearly people thought you were gonna do a great job. That's why you were asked to do it, and
Mm.
you shined, you did your great work, and someone noticed it, and I love that you said yes to the opportunity. You probably had no idea what they were talking about. Investment in what? Like, like,
Yeah.
okay, but you go and you learn and you apply yourself, you do good work, and, I love your shout out to, stay-at-home parents because, I called myself a work at home dad because I was the primary caregiver for first one and then 2 kids that were under 3.5 years old, but I was
Mm.
also building my business.
Mm.
And so I kept my brain active because they fortunately napped really well. So I had lots of downtime in the middle of the day, and that's what I did. But if I didn't have that, I couldn't just sit there all day. So I appreciate that.
Yes, shout out to you. That's the juggle is real, Robbie. It
Yeah,
is
it's
real.
real.
And I think that's incredible. I will never regret the time I took off to spend and
Right.
focus on my family. Never regret that. I'm sure you feel the exact same way. Because it's one of the most important jobs I have is raising the little leaders that I have in my life.
You said 5 years ago you finally took the leap. What
Mm.
was the precipitating factor to go from this more steady, paycheck, which we think of as very secure, and then with all these mergers and acquisitions and layoffs and
Yeah.
recessions, so maybe not as secure as we once thought. But to go from that to it's all you, what was sort of leading you into that?
It wasn't something that I ever dreamed of. I never planned on owning my own company, didn't desire it. Like a lot of people or just know they're wired as entrepreneurs and want to do it. But I have been intentional about every job change I made to diversify my career. Like every one was a different industry. I wanted to get exposure. And I think as a result of being exposed to so many different industries and different ways of solving problems, it made me more creative and a better problem solver and strategist. And so I was working as head of education for an association, as I mentioned earlier, and I met so many incredible people who were living out their life's purpose. Like they were really just doing what living and opening their gifts and sharing them with the world. And I said, that's what I want to do that. I want to do that. And so without a plan, I left that organization and launched my own practice. And so grateful that I had once people that I'd worked with before found out I was a free agent, other companies, partners, so on and so forth. I had a full line up pipeline of business for the first year that really set me on the right foot. So that first year was fulfilling, doing a lot of interesting work, different stuff. And then the first year ended and my pipeline dried up because I hadn't spent any time building my business. And so then COVID hit. And so I had to get really creative about diversifying the income streams. And I'm so grateful to go back to online learning. I had built a whole library of online learning courses that were available. And so when people weren't attending conferences for education, they were taking my online courses. And that passive income really helped give me the pause to build that book of business for consulting keynote gigs, to write my book, and also sustain the income that was coming in when everything else had dried up. So that was a really interesting journey. Now that I'm on my own, reflecting on my experience within an organization, without or outside of an organization, I don't have the constraints, creativity constraints that I did when I was working within an organization. Typically there's somebody that is going to be a bit more risk averse, less open to innovative ideas that will say no to your ideas. I don't have that now. And so I feel like I'm just free to truly open my gifts and share them in a radically creative and innovative way. And I'm so grateful that it's working.
I'm so grateful it's working too, because you're
Thank you.
bringing really important conversations to light, and you've faced several challenges just in what you were sharing. I mean, one, leaving leaving a full-time role without a real plan in place is a challenge that you may not have been fully aware of, as it happened. But you were gifted a year runway, and unfortunately, we're so busy kind of doing that work, you weren't building the business, which I think
Mhm.
folks either have that issue or they have the issue of they don't know where to find those first clients. And so
Mhm.
I was just talking about this in the context of creating content. That I have a friend who helps people be more efficient with creating content, and he realized who would want to buy his service, his class, and who wouldn't. And the people who are just starting out, their whole business is creating content. They
Oh,
don't
for
have
sure.
clients yet, so like they don't see the problem. Like, don't take that away from me. That's how I'm proving myself to be a business owner. Whereas, actually having a pipeline of clients that you can count on is how you have a successful business. So
Right.
when you were about to make that shift, was that right before COVID hit that you had that realization?
It was about 2 years before COVID hit when
Yeah.
I had that realization for sure. Yeah.
And you started to build, but that's when you started building some online content,
Mhm.
and diversifying so that you weren't
Mhm.
just trying to do the one thing. It's great you have this background in digital learning, which clearly put
Absolutely.
you at an advantage when we all shifted our work to the online space. How did you? What was your biggest takeaway with COVID? Like how it shaped how you were kind of taking your message and sharing it. What changed about who you were wanting to work with and what they were looking for from you?
Yeah, there's a lot of silver linings during COVID. Tragic time in our world, but some silver linings as well. And because I had that experience with digital education, I was able to make the pivot pretty quickly. I had already been doing digital or online education in a way that's brain friendly.
Hmm.
So when everybody jumped into it and they're trying to figure it all out, I already knew it has to be incredibly engaging. You've got to get people talking, peer to peer learning, get people talking to one another. Don't lecture at people for 30 minutes or 60 minutes, because you're going to lose their attention. And so creating high quality, engaging, brain friendly content was also a differentiator for me. And then I also realized that I did have a pause. Like there was still a lull where I needed to be adding value to the world. And so I also shifted into providing pro bono coaching for people who wanted to be speakers eventually and also to leaders who wanted to up their game. And I discovered new services that are a big part of my business today, which is leadership coaching. And I was able to build frameworks and refine it. And so it was incubator time with the pause due to the pandemic. Let me just work through some new creative offerings, and they're truly adding a lot of value to the people that I serve and bringing significant revenue to the business.
So interesting because back in March 2020 to like September 2020, there were the entrepreneurs and speakers who really hit pause and hit the brakes and waited for it to get back to normal essentially. And there
Mhm.
are those that sort of hit the gas, innovated, tried things. I said, looking back at that time, no one was paying attention to what I was doing because we were all so self-focused and just trying to, it was like we're trying to do our best to stay afloat. We're not looking at how everyone else is doing it. And
Mm.
so if you tried something, it didn't work, like no one really commented.
Mm.
If you tried something and learned one piece that worked, and then you had to try it again 16 times, and you finally, it felt very freeing to be out there trying things out. And I
Yeah.
try to hold that space now when we're back to, able to look around a little more. But it sounds like you try to show up and offer value. That became my mantra. I hosted my first virtual happy hour on March 13th, 2020. I'm still hosting it 2.5+ years
Oh my
later.
goodness, that's fantastic.
Free events, gather people, right? It launched a successful multi six figure business, all new revenue streams. Like you said, like you
Mm.
try things out, you see what people need.
Yeah.
And all the work I did pre-pandemic was about conferences, networking at them. At
Mm.
being the operative word. We weren't going at anything. We were going
Mhm.
on. And so yeah, I think you were saying earlier you have worked on so many different sectors and industries. And I do, your work is an innovation. I always think that like innovation comes from the outer edges of our network, and you were able to
Mhm.
take from all these different pieces. You're learning from digital media way back in the day, bringing that to brain friendliness, which is clearly what we needed in a moment where we're all just like, do we need
Mm.
another just like static
Yeah.
45 minutes of death by PowerPoint? Like, thanks. Um, so really great. And now these days, if I were speaking with someone and there's going to be something they say that makes me think, oh, I got to introduce them to Melissa, what would they be talking about that would make them a really good referral for you?
Hmm. What would they be talking about to refer me? They would be trying to rehumanize their teams and their companies for not just moral reasons, but because they recognize it's best for the business. Like when humans on your teams thrive, your bottom line is going to thrive. But we've gotten away from, I don't want to say we've gotten away. We're gradually getting better at recognizing the human need and experience as we're leading people. And the companies that are doing that really well are seeing higher profitability, lower turnover, higher engagement, more innovation, better decisions. And those leaders who want to figure that out, that's when you call me in, because I can help them figure it out in a very actionable way. I am not a fixer like an Olivia Pope. If you have burned the place down and made some really dumb statements and things like that, that is too late to call me. The companies who get it and they understand that inclusion is a competitive advantage and they recognize it can help boost all of the goals that they want to achieve for the business, those are the ones that I work with unapologetically.
Brilliant. I
Mm,
love that. I
thank
was
you.
definitely keeping an ear out, and you're making me think of two things. One is I interviewed Brian Kramer, whose interview came out a week before yours, and his company is Human to Human, or H to H, and
Hmm.
I think you're going to want to enjoy that when it
I'd
comes
love to
out.
meet Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this conversation is so important. I'm hearing a lot more people talking about it. Ann Bono, who's another person I interviewed, and she's actually on my team. She talks a lot about this, like, it's like being humanity in the workplace. Like,
Mhm.
all have slightly different angles. Hers is more leadership, yours is more inclusion, belonging. Like, but I think that it's all the same thing, and it's how I'm thinking about events too, because events were always about content and connection back when we got on planes all the time, and
Mm.
virtual can't be an exception. So I'm actually working right now on a book around purpose first design and intentional engagement, and how we have
Ah.
to use these tools. Not, what we did in 2020 can't be where we stop. We have to keep elevating. I think it's such a great conversation. I'm really curious how you think about your network. Clearly your network is, I mean, robust and multifaceted. I feel like you know people from lots of different areas. You seem pretty good at keeping in touch with people. Rachel Sharon, who you met through the events industry, I'm guessing,
Rachel, love, love, love
helped us
Rachel.
connect us. So, good people in your world. So
Yeah.
how do you think about, you have your inner circle, the people that you know you're going to stay in touch with, or easily keep up with. And then you have that sort of second and third tier, or second and third layers out, the people you might see once a year at a conference,
Mhm.
or you worked with them 5 years ago. I should preface this by saying you like these people, they like you. How do you think about staying in touch and nurturing those kinds of relationships? Any habits or philosophies or practices?
I have a special gift. I really deeply care about people and I remember what they care about. And so if I talk to you in 3 years, I'm gonna remember you had little kids and that you were a stay-at-home parent and took care of them and while you were juggling building your practice, and we'll talk about that. And I think, um, because I'm naturally wired to do that, whether I've seen you last week or in 5 years from now, just that connection never breaks, if you know what I mean? And so there's always that, that deep relationship connection. It does take time and process, though, to nurture those when you have a large network. And so, I do have my personal board of directors, it's an informal, just people who we call on for insight, for opportunities, introductions to vent, what have you, go grab a glass of wine. You have that inner circle of people. But, there are folks in that circle that you may say are 2 or 3 layers removed that have been incredibly, um, inspirational and have shaped my thoughts and philosophies, and they're still just important to me. And so we may not see each other as much, but again, the relationship and the connection will be strong for life with all of those people. And I also think I have a a responsibility when I'm on stage because oftentimes there are thousands of people who are hearing my voice and my insight all at the same time. And they're giving me time from their lives to share my thoughts. And that comes with deep responsibility. And so when those people reach out and they need some help or some guidance or a sounding board, I do everything I can to make myself available for them when I can. And so um, a long-winded way of just saying I deeply love people and I genuinely care about them and want them to thrive. And if there's a way, whether it's every now and then or it's more regularly, I can help them thrive, I do that. And just to share a story with you, I was connected with a woman yesterday who's just starting her keynote speaking business. I shared everything, my speaker agreements, my licensing agreements, introductions in my network. And I don't see it as competition. I want her to thrive and be successful. And you mentioned Rachel Sheeran. She's just as gracious and generous with her insight and wisdom and resource. And I think the more we can do that versus hoarding our own stuff, the better off everybody's going to be in the world.
I love this. You mentioned personal board of directors, and if folks listening are thinking, wait, how do I do that? What is that? I will mention a resource, Dory Clark, who I've interviewed, and she's a friend and mentor of mine. She wrote about this in Reinventing You, her first book, and it's a really great idea to just identify people who have experience or skills, or even just the kind of attitude you need. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
my virtual assistant has a lot of spunk when it comes to like what you should do when you show up, and she's working on her own visibility, but she pushes me, and then we have these conversations. We end up with I get with a better post because I'm being real. Keeps me from just being stodgy, like you don't
Yeah.
want to be like, just do these things. It's like, tell a story, and I love that. So have the people in your life that will kind of feed you what you need in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were also talking about giving away knowledge, which I think is my, like, I don't know. It's like it's the thing I love to do most. I don't know. I don't know what that would.
Fulfilling.
I my favorite thing in the world, and I call it the philosophy of abundance,
Mm.
because if I give away my time or my money, I'm gonna have less of that, because that's just, mathematic.
Yeah.
But if I give away knowledge, I'm increasing possibility for everyone around me. And I
Ooh.
don't know how that's gonna end up. Like, that could ripple back to me or back to my community. Like, it'll just create, and that feels like an additive, not like I'm losing anything. And so I'm like
Mm-hmm.
you, I've got links always every call, right? Like, oh, try this, try this. I just happened upon someone's LinkedIn, their very first LinkedIn post. I was searching some keywords and I found it, and she has 17 connections on LinkedIn, and she admitted it being her first post and said, reply with your number one LinkedIn tip. And I wrote a whole essay because I'm like, all right, you asked, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
Um, so I think,
That's what it's about.
it sounds like at your core, you like people, right? You love people. You remember things that are important to them. That helps a lot. Do you have actual tools? Is there a CRM? Is there a time
Mm.
of the week you do a thing? Do you mail gifts? Do you host dinner parties? Like, is there something a little more tangible that you're doing?
To be honest with you right now, I practically burned myself out about a year or so ago. After my book came out, I was just incredibly grateful for the success, but gobbled up everything I could, traveled all over the country, promoting so on and so forth. And it was in the December timeframe that I burned myself out. I just took on too much. And so right now I'm really intentional about finding balance. And so hosting dinner parties, hosting events, although yes, those are things that I used to do on a regular basis. I'm focused intentionally right now on having more quiet in my life so that I can be my best self to everybody that I serve, friends, family, myself, so on and so forth. And so, no, I'll be honest with you. I don't have those tangible things related to networking that I'm doing right now because I'm still working through finding the right balance so that I can be my best self and give back to the world the way it deserves.
I've been hearing this term burnout a lot lately in conversation. I mean, I think we've all been paddling as hard as we can. And
Mm.
if we don't catch a wave, we, we really can exhaust ourselves.
Mhm.
And that can be hard to recover from. So kudos to you for recognizing that was happening and taking the time to recalibrate how you show up in the world.
Yeah,
And
thank
what's
you.
great is that when you show up, you do show up fully. And so people really appreciate that. That you can't do that if you don't have a self to share. So
Mhm.
you're doing the hard work.
Thank you.
I'm clear that I want to stay in touch with you, and this is my favorite sort of closing question. I say it's a year from now, and I say, oh my gosh, Melissa, that was a year ago that we had our first ever conversation as part of this interview. I'm going to ask you what you're celebrating. Like, what are the highlights of the previous year? And
Yeah.
that's my question to you. What are you looking forward to the most in the year ahead?
I'm gonna celebrate that I have a second book coming out. You're the first one to hear about that, so we'll have that to celebrate. I'm gonna celebrate that I'm in the best mental and physical shape of my life, and I'm gonna celebrate that my friends and family are thriving,
These are
and
all good
that's
things.
enough.
Yeah. These are
Yeah,
all good things, and
thank
all
you.
you hit all the spheres that you need to. That's wonderful. I can't wait to
Yeah.
celebrate all of that with you.
Yeah, it's gonna be
M
fun. I look forward to it,
Melissa,
Robbie.
how can people find you and follow your work?
Yeah, best way to find me is go to my website, melissamajors.com. And then I'm all on all the other channels, Instagram, LinkedIn, so on and so forth. But go to melissamajors.com. That'll be the place where you can learn more about me, read blogs, buy my book, The 7 Simple Habits of Inclusive Leaders, and get in touch with me. So as I mentioned, if there's a way that I can help you work through anything that you're trying to work through, you want to be a leader that really helps others thrive and involves others equally, call me. And I'd love to talk to you.
Brilliant. We'll have all those links in the show notes at ontheschmooze.com. Melissa, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it, Robbie. So great chatting with you today. Thank you.